this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2 or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It is pretty cold for the time of year for some of us, and with that, there is the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through this evening and overnight. That's because we have a weather system coming in from the west, and it's going to bump against the cold air that's across many northern parts of the UK currently, leading to the risk of some significant snow, particularly across northern parts of England. Could be up to 20 centimetres perhaps over some higher ground, and even some accumulations to lower levels too. Also a snow and ice risk across parts of Northern Ireland and the far north of Scotland. Across parts of Scotland where we get some clear skies, temperatures plummeting. A harsh frost here, with some places falling to around -8, possibly even colder than this. But it's going to be a milder start further south, where we have a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain. So a bit damp first thing across southern parts, but also relatively mild. Most of the snow and the wet weather across northern England will have cleared away as we go through early in the morning, and also across Northern Ireland it should have turned dry by then. Meanwhile, across Scotland, a bright but frosty start for many places. Do watch out for some icy patches and a little bit of lying snow as well because of those wintry showers coming in from the north. As we go through the day, and yes, most of the wet and wintry weather will have cleared away towards the east. Watch out though, there will be some outbreaks of rain feeding into parts of the southwest in particular, and across the north of Scotland we're going to continue to see those wintry showers. So again, some sleet or snow with accumulations continuing to build up. It is going to be a chilly day, temperatures on the low side for the time of year and feeling even colder in those brisk winds. Little change as we go into Wednesday, sticking with a cold northerly flow, and it's on that northerly flow that we're going to see some further wintry showers in anywhere exposed to that wind direction. And again, despite the fact that there will be plenty of sunshine around, it is still going to feel bitterly cold. We are going to see some further wintry showers through the rest of the week, perhaps some more persistent snow for some of us. Bye-bye.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
A very, very good evening and welcome to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. Tonight on the show, Sir Keir Starmer has opened the door to paying other countries to take illegal migrants. Sound familiar? Also,
we will not live in a two-tier country. Absolutely not.
Nigel Farage launches a private prosecution over the Manchester airport brawl. We'll get more on that later in the show. And the Prime Minister looks set to cosy up to China. Is that wise, given our recent dodgy relationship with Beijing? All of that in the next hour and plenty other stuff on top. But first, your latest news headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Martin. The time is just after 7 o'clock and these are your latest GB News headlines. With world leaders attending the G20 summit in Brazil, the PM has said Ukraine is top of his agenda. This comes after President Joe Biden has given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. President Vladimir Putin warned the West they would be throwing fuel on the fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied missiles at Russia. This decision from Mr. Biden seems to have been prompted by a move from North Korea, in which they've sent thousands of troops to fight with Russia. Elsewhere in politics, Sir Keir Starmer says he's absolutely confident that the vast majority of farms and farmers will not be affected by changes to inheritance tax announced in the budget. A protest is expected in Westminster tomorrow as farmers rally on Whitehall against the changes announced in last month's budget, while separately the National Farmers Union will hold a mass lobby of MPs in their efforts to get the government to rethink. Earlier, the son of a British farmer told GB News how this decision could impact his dream of becoming a farmer.
It makes me feel like disappointed in the government because they're taking away something that me and I'm guessing all of my generation of farms opportunities to become farmers when they're older. I'd say just think about how this affects my generation of farmers and how it affects their future of doing something that they've dreamed about for years.
In other news, burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince, Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby, although the King and Queen were not in residence. The Sun has reported that two men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stolen farm vehicles during the raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate, said to be the nearest exit for the Prince, Princess and their children, before targeting Shaw Farm, a working farm inside the estate. And finally, the Met Office says the UK is braced for disruptive snow, ice and cold temperatures over the coming days. Up to 20 centimetres of snow may accumulate in the worst affected areas in what's being described by the Met Office as the country's first taste of winter. Today, snow and frost have been recorded across parts of the Yorkshire Dales, as well as in certain areas of Scotland, including at the Cogarth Viewpoint in Aberdeenshire. That's as an amber warning is now in place across the east and north of England, the Midlands, Yorkshire and the Humber, with yellow alerts coming into place for the south east, south west and London tomorrow morning, all lasting until 6 p.m. on Saturday. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening, this is Farage with me, Martin Daubney. I'm standing in for the big man. Now then, following a report in the Sunday Times, the government was in talks with Kurdistan in Iraq, Turkey and Vietnam to strike an Italy-style model of paying millions of pounds to countries in return for them doing more to stop migrant crossings. The Prime Minister has hinted at paying nations to take back their illegal migrants. Well, ahead of his visit to the G20 summit of world leaders in Brazil, he told reporters, including GB News' Christopher Hope, on the flight over there, Sir Keir Starmer said this: anything else we can do to stop people leaving in the first place is the right thing. Now, as you will know, this has been one of the many issues for the Prime Minister and his Labour government since he won the election in July, with more than 29,000 making the journey from France this year alone. As Keir Starmer famously scrapped the previous government's Rwanda returns policy on his very first day in office, promising instead to smash the gangs. However, over the weekend, The Sun on Sunday reported that Donald Trump is now thinking of adopting the precise same policy. Well, joining me in the studio in Westminster to discuss this is the former Director General of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith, as well, of course, as my stellar panel. It's the former Conservative MP Michael Brown and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Tony, I'm going to start with you. Now, as I see this, there are two types of return agreements. One is where we have the power to deport, like Albania, UK, or in Italy, they can turn the boats around, tow them back to Libya and Tunisia. That's precipitated a 64% decline, because guess what? They get sent back if they break the rules. The second deal is the deal we've got with France. £500 million, and the numbers are going through the roof, seeming to me, while the gendarmes smoke gitan on the beaches of Normandy. Call me a cynic. We're doing these 3 country deals now, Turkey, Kurdistan and Vietnam. Will it be a deal with teeth like Italy's or like Albania, or will it be a pointless, expensive one like we've got with France? Do we know any details?
The short answer, Martin, is no. I don't know the details of this yet. It's only just been announced, and I think we do need to scrutinise exactly what the arrangement will be with these 3 countries. But you're right in that these international arrangements or agreements, if you like, come in different shapes and sizes. And the thing that's lacking from the deal with the French is there is no returns arrangement, no third country. We call it a third country returns agreement. That's not been in place for a long time. There was the Dublin Convention before that, but even that didn't really work. So you're right, we can't send people back to France to claim asylum. The Albanian deal was much more encouraged by. The Albanian deal was a pretty strong outreach effort by the UK government to give them infrastructure, not just money, but infrastructure support, intelligence assets, them to send officers over here to Dover to help identify their own nationals, and indeed a returns agreement, which actually meant that we could very swiftly return Albanians to Albania, and that has worked, and that's really the only significant reduction we've seen in the boats intake in the last couple of years is what's happening with Albania. So we'll have to wait and see, I think, what's going on with these 3 countries.
And Tony, quelle surprise, if you have the power to deport, then the numbers tend to dwindle. We've seen it anywhere on the planet that's brought this in. Australia being the totemic original template for this. And again, these deals in Italy, a 64% downturn because lots of money went to Tunisia and Libya on the ground. By the way, some of that was investing in fossil fuels, but also building detention camps and empowering their Coast Guard to turn the boats back. Otherwise, that money over there is going to dry up. There was a threat of deportation. There's a financial incentive for those African nations to make it work. Hey, presto, the deal works. Surely that's the template we must follow with Turkey, Kurdistan and Vietnam.
I think the first thing is, yes, you're right, returns are the only effective deterrent. If you know that you're going to be sent back, then you're not going to get in one of those boats and pay $5,000 to a smuggler, because there's no point, actually. And so, that's why I say the Albania deal was a good deal. I mean, I think we need to be clear. People need to understand what's going on down in the Med. The Central Med route is 64% reduction, actually. Yeah. It's a pretty big reduction. Yeah. And that's been negotiated because the EU and Italy have put money in to the Coast Guard in Tunisia and Libya, and they are actually stopping people from coming across the Med to claim asylum, which is what we really want France to do, isn't it?
Yeah, but they won't
come across the English.
But they won't do that because, I mean, I've been saying for many, many months, you've no doubt been saying for many years, where's the incentive for the French to take immigrants back when they can't even control their own borders? I know you've been a fan historically, many times I've spoken to you of the Rwanda deal, and look who's just stepped in, Donald Trump. He's going to hoover up the deal that's been rejected by Keir Starmer on day one. Isn't it amazing? Millions and millions of pounds worth of infrastructure already built in Rwanda, rejected by us. Donald Trump's going to step in, he says, and do the precise same thing. And he's not encumbered by the European Court of Human Rights. America, a true sovereign independent nation, could deport thousands of immigrants, illegals, to Rwanda on day one if they so choose. Pointing out, is it not, another foreign policy failure on behalf of the British government?
So, as I said to you before, Martin, I'm not a politician. I'm a practitioner. I worked in the Border Force for 40 years, man and boy, and I can tell you that, actually, the Border Force is there to implement the legislation, the laws that we've got. But the bottom line is, these days, you can't remove people unless you've got somewhere to send them to. Now, coming across undocumented, we all know why that is. They want to conceal their nationality, their identity, sometimes their age from us. It's really, really hard then for the Border Force to find out who they are, where they've been, where they're from. Then they go through an asylum process. Some countries won't take them back. So that's why I was a fan of the Rwanda deal. It was not the same as the Australian model, but it gave you another outlet for those people that were coming, those cohorts of countries from places like Syria or Afghanistan or Iran. I'm not saying they're not refugees. They might well be refugees, but it doesn't follow. But they might get status. They might not be, but either way, you will not get status in this country. We will take you to a safe country. We had 2 years of litigation, more than that, to prove Rwanda was a safe country. I went there. It is a safe country. They've got a number of refugees already in Rwanda. They want people there. The only ones they didn't really want was nasty people like criminals. And but I mean, for a migrant who's coming across here, you could resettle yourself in Rwanda. But that I just think I don't want to keep an eye on the money here, Martin. I like you guys keeping the money because we're doing deals here, there, and everywhere with other countries. One of the major flaws behind the Rwanda policy, part of it didn't work because we didn't have the legislative framework to do it, but was the financial costs of it all. And I'd just like to know how much all these other deals are all costing and what else is costing money in all the other policies that we're developing. Because the fact is, without something like that, with a deterrent that is actually going to ensure and say to people in Calais, there's no point you getting in that boat to come across here because you won't be allowed to stay. Without that, then what are we going to do instead? And I'm not sure that this latest package is going to be, you know, a panacea. It's going to be a step in the right direction, but it's not going to stop the boats.
Excellent. So that's bringing my panel at that moment. Nigel Nelson, Michael Brown. Nigel, going to start with you tonight. So you've heard it here from Tony. This man, as he said, man and boy, lived and breathed, trying to control our borders, often in the face of a severe political headwind. Is this the kind of deal that you think is going to work? The Labour Party need a result, sharpish. Can this deliver?
It'll help. And what Keir Starmer has said is not that it'll suddenly end the boats or anything like that. And it depends how it does work. So it can't be the same as the Italy deal. What Italy were doing were supplying patrol boats to Libya and Tunisia, training up border force officers. Now, we can't do the same thing because those are the people...
If only we could.
But we obviously can't because we're talking about the Channel, not the Mediterranean. So that's what the Italians were doing. What they're also doing, which is more promising, is they're investing in businesses in Libya, so that will provide employment, which means people would stay. They're investing in education, again, the same thing, as they would stay there. So if we're looking at that kind of deal, say with Vietnam, safe country, we've already got a returns agreement with them that we're starting to send people back. This might discourage people from leaving in the first place, and that is the only thing that we can hope to do, which won't entirely stop the boats, but it might reduce them.
It might discourage them. I might end up being an astronaut. Michael Brown, let's bring you in. Has this kind of deal got any fangs, or is it just all performative?
Oh, it hasn't got a chance in hell. Martin, Turkey, there's not a hope. This morning it was reported that Turkey are themselves just simply getting rid of as many migrants that they have as possible. They're all going to Bulgaria, and next stop, after a few European countries, into Britain. So there's no hope.
They've got 4 million refugees there. They've taken a lot of people in.
Yes, but they are today, they made an announcement today, Erdogan's government made an announcement today that is going to stop, that they are going to export people out of their country. They are going to deport, and they're going to then get into Bulgaria, and then there'll be fast transport onto the French coast.
Nigel Nelson, isn't that the point? These kind of containment deals, here you go, here's a few £100 million to make sure they stay in your country. The moment they're out the border, it's toothless. They'll be straight, toot sweet, all the way to Dover, on the next available dinghy.
Which is the point about trying to keep people in their own country. And, you know, that was the point that Tony was making there, that if you can do that, if you can stop them leaving in the first place, take a Vietnamese refugee or an asylum seeker coming from Vietnam. It's one hell of a journey getting all the way from Vietnam to Calais to try and get across the English Channel. It takes them years. And the only reason we've had an uptick is because of delays through COVID and things like that. Now, if you can encourage those people not to leave in the first place, that is better for everybody.
But you mentioned just now, and this is where Nigel's it might happen, is not going to play ball, because for the very reason that Turkey has got migrants up to 1 million that have come in. They are literally exporting them, and the country that they're going to be pushed out to, I suspect, will be through Bulgaria, and there's only one-way traffic in one direction to Northern Europe and ultimately onto the French beaches.
Final word to Tony Smith. Millions and millions of euros and pounds and dollars have been spent already, particularly in Turkey, trying to do precisely this. It hasn't particularly worked. Can this work this time, or is it just more throwing good money after bad?
I think if you put the politics aside, it is a good idea for our government to speak to other governments. The best borders work when people on both sides of them get along. So I think it is right that they should be talking to these countries to see how we can do, what arrangements can we make to make it better for them to stay in their own country, for not to fall into the hands of smugglers. What can they do to disrupt the smuggling gangs that are actually operating in source and transit countries? I think that's all a good thing, Martin, but the bottom line is if we really, really want to stop the boats, you've got to send people back. And if the French aren't going to, we can't do a deal with the French, they won't have them back in the EU, we have to find somewhere to send them. And I'm afraid the nationality cohorts are such that some we can remove from some of these countries and some we cannot. And that will continue to obtain for as long as we carry on like this.
Tony Smith, excellent. Michael Brown, Nigel Nelson, thank you very much. Stick around, panel, because, of course, you'll be back after the break. Now, get in touch with your thoughts on all the stories we're covering tonight, this evening. You do that by going to gbnews.com/your say. Now, after the break, Nigel Farage has announced that Reform UK will be funding a private prosecution over that Manchester airport brawl. I'll be assessing whether this shows that we are living in a two-tier society. You will not want to miss it.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
This is one of those angles, really. There's going to be so many different sort of tentacles which go from Donald Trump winning and where this leads for the royal family. Where's it going to lead for Harry?
Well, put it this way, Harry's just bought a house in Portugal and it might come in pretty handy in the next few months because Donald Trump has said in the past that he wouldn't protect Harry, that he would be on his own, and that if it was down to me, this is Donald Trump, if it was down to me, he wouldn't have any protection. And the Heritage Foundation tried to expose his form, and in the end, he was protected, and a judge ruled that the form would never be revealed. I just wonder whether now Trump is in power, I'm not saying it's top of his priority list, but eventually that form might be exposed.
And just so to remind viewers and listeners, Charlotte, in his book Spare, in which he, of course, dumped tons of abuse on his own family, Harry admitted to taking illegal drugs such as cocaine.
Yes, and there have been, you know, I better not name her, but there's been a certain supermodel who has been exposed for taking cocaine. She couldn't go into America for 10 years. It doesn't matter how famous you are, you can't take drugs and go into America. They're very strict on this. So if Harry didn't tick that box, and then he wrote in Spare that he's taken magic mushrooms, marijuana and cocaine, it wasn't a very clever move.
Oh, the implications, though, of Donald Trump saying that Harry can't live in America, like the political ramifications of that. I can't see Starmer handling that very well.
No, and well, he just might say he wants people in America who've told the truth about drug taking, and he's got zero tolerance on illegal drug taking, Trump.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, covering for the big man. Now, some of your thoughts in. A viewer said this: I wonder if Nigel Farage and Richard Tice will tell Donald Trump that the Rwanda plan is a gimmick and it won't work. Tony adds this: why on earth are we paying other countries to curb illegal migration? It's still costing us money. Just keep throwing money at it. It's all utterly pointless. And Rodney adds this: if the boats were going in the other direction, then France would push them back. Rodney, I think you're probably right. Now, welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. The man himself has announced that he is taking the Manchester airport incident, when police and two men were involved in a brawl back in the summer, into his own hands by mounting a private prosecution via a private firm. Nigel and his Reform Party say that this is evidence of two-tier policing and a reminder of the incident. Video footage emerged of a physical altercation in which officers appeared to be restraining a man and using excessive force. Well, a later clip showed that man appeared to assault officers prior to the original footage. And the police watchdog has launched an investigation whilst two men have been arrested and released on bail with no charges yet brought to them by the Crown Prosecution Service. Since that incident, of course, way back in July, on July the 3rd. Now, the reason for Nigel's fury and why his deputy leader, Richard Tice, said this earlier today.
Announced that we were going to do this private criminal prosecution. We thought we might hear from somebody. Absolute silence. Zip, nothing at all. So the firm that we have instructed is TMI Limited. They are the largest private prosecutor in the country. We said we'd do it, we waited to hear, we've heard nothing, so we're left with no alternative.
Yeah, we will not live in a two-tier country. Absolutely not.
There we go. We'll not live in a two-tiered country. Well, just over this weekend, there have been even more accusations of two-tier policing. One pro-Palestine protester in North London said over this weekend that Zionists should be put down, perhaps.
Now, these people are terminally deranged. And the sickness is Zionism. And it's incurable. So they just need to be put down, perhaps.
They got put down, perhaps. And once again, old Bill wander off. Simply nothing to see here. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail reported that a father was arrested for calling another Jewish man a Nazi slur in a private Facebook post. In response to the pro-Palestine protester, the Met Police said the language in this video is unacceptable. Officers are conducting a thorough investigation, but we understand and acknowledge concerns raised about the apparent lack of immediate action by the officers present. We are reviewing the circumstances to understand what happened. And in the latest of what appears to be the overzealous sentencing of Southport protesters, today a former soldier, Daffron Williams, who made Facebook posts referring to civil war in the aftermath of the Southport attacks, has been jailed for 2 years. He said at the time, "Civil war is here. The only thing that's missing is bullets. That's the next step." Now, despite telling the courts that Williams, who had served on tours of Afghanistan and Iraq, that he suffered from PTSD, having seen comrades brutally killed, he still has been handed a custodial sentence of 2 years. Now, that's a lot to take in. And to dissect it, I'm now joined by the solicitor and the legal commentator, Joshua Rosenberg, KC. Joshua, always a delight to have your esteemed company. Could I ask you, you've written a very thought-provoking Substack, first of all, on the private prosecution case taken up by Nigel Farage and Richard Tice about the Manchester airport incident. A lot of people are asking, how come it's taken since August the 3rd, with there being no resolution, no prosecution, these men still enjoying their liberty, and yet the courts were open 24 hours a day. After Southport, people were jailed within 2 weeks. Is this example of two-tier policing?
I don't think it is. The people who were jailed after Southport all pleaded guilty. They were very straightforward cases. The police had video evidence. It was easy to identify the people. They put their hands up to it. They pleaded guilty. They were processed quickly, but they were sentenced promptly because they had pleaded guilty. Now, nobody has pleaded guilty to anything involving the Manchester airport incident. It's much more complicated. You have got several several different suspects and a great deal of complicated evidence to look at. I agree with you that it would be very good if the police had completed their inquiries and if the Crown Prosecution Service had decided what charges to bring. But just because they haven't yet completed their investigations, it doesn't follow that this is an example of two-tier policing. After all, nobody has been charged arising from that incident.
And yet, Joshua, we saw footage there of Nazi slurs made in front of the police. I myself have been through Parliament Square that time when From the River to the Sea was being projected onto Big Ben. I personally said to police there, the projector is there, take it down, that's a crime. They had no interest whatsoever, none at all, in doing anything about that. But I've been on other protests with, I guess you'd call them patriots, at Whitehall. The police were straight in there, tooled up, in all the riot gear. It does absolutely appear at ground level that we are seeing two-tier policing. Is that fair or not?
You can certainly give examples where it's clear that the police have not intervened and examples where they have intervened. If you want to infer from that that that's two-tier policing, well, that's a matter of opinion. I'm not going to defend the police. I'm critical of the police in many ways. But they have a difficult job. They tend to think that if they keep both sides apart and allow both sides to shout at each other, then that's all that they need to do. And there is criticism. On the other hand, they're humans. They have limited resources. They have insufficient support for what they are required to do by us, and they're facing increasingly violent protesters. So I have some sympathy for the police. I'm not going to accuse them of two-tier policing, but I certainly think that there can be criticism of the way they handle particular incidents.
Do you think, added to the fact that the police seem to be relatively benign on the ground, for example, if it's pro-Palestine protest, and the opposite if it's from, I guess you'd say, the other side, added to the fact the courts were thrown open 24 hours a day to make sure justice was swiftly handed down after Southport, we don't seem to see the same zeal applied the other way around. That, again, it does impart that feeling of two-tiered justice.
I think that's a fair criticism. After Southport, or indeed during Southport, it was very important to the authorities to put a stop to the violence that they saw on the streets. Now, these demonstrations, undoubtedly criminal offences are committed by what people have said at these demonstrations, and damage has been done to property and so on. But the police would say that they are more peaceful than what we saw at Southport, and therefore the political imperative to act quickly is not there. Now, I think the police and the prosecution service, independently of government, they weren't told what to do by ministers, were well aware that the country wanted things to be done quickly. And you could say that the fact that the police and prosecutors intervened quickly, the courts rushed cases through, they televised their sentencing remarks, they provided video recordings to the media so that you could see what the offender did at the time you saw the person sentenced. I think this all had an impact on the public, and helped to limit and, in fact, put an end to the violence we saw. So I think that was a good thing. I think it's rather more difficult when you've got thousands of people on the street. I certainly think, though, that the police could do more.
Joshua, briefly, if we could, do you think that the legal case that Mr Farage and Mr Tice have brought has any chance of succeeding?
No, I don't, because for two reasons. First of all, they are unlikely to have as much evidence as the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, and the courts are very reluctant to grant summonses. And secondly, if the court was to grant a summons against anybody that Mr Farage and Mr Tice were to name, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Crown Prosecution Service, can step in and stop it.
Okay, thank you very much for your expertise. As ever, Joshua Rosenberg-Casey, thanks for joining us tonight on Farage. Now, over to my panel, back to the studio, of course, Michael Brown, Nigel Nelson still with me. Michael Brown, we heard there little chance of success in the eyes of Joshua Rosenberg. Nevertheless, there is this huge sense, this feeling of frustration that if the police won't police, if the courts won't act in cases like this, private cases are stepping in. Does this just further impart this feeling that we do have two-tiered justice in Britain?
Yes, I'm afraid that the general impression by the ordinary members of the general public, myself included, is that the events of the last week involving the non-crime hate incident recordings and the manner in which certain police forces decide to prioritise certain crimes or and by the way, non-crime hate incident is not a crime. You either break the law, in which case you should be prosecuted with the full force of the law and sent to the courts for the appropriate decision by the magistrates or Crown Courts and a jury. But in the case of so many of these undermining incidents by the police, I mean, I think that you called Starmer in relation this afternoon to the farmers, Starmer, farmer, harmer.
Well,
I got a new one.
That's what some militant farmers are saying.
Starmer's Stasi. Because what the police are doing with the non-crime hate incidents is basically behaving like the Stasi did in East Germany between 1945 and 1989. I have some locus in this, in that my sister's daughter, my niece, who all of them live in Germany, her in-laws came from Eastern Germany to Hamburg in 1989 when the wall came down, and they will tell you that you were policed for your thoughts. And now we're getting policing for the wrong thought. And it's encouraged by the particular encouragement of certain cabinet ministers. I couldn't believe, by the way, this morning that you reported that Bridget Phillipson said on a morning news programme that she wasn't going to intervene over the 9-year-old who had been reported for a non-crime hate incident. She's in charge of schools. The police should be nowhere near that incident at all. And I think this is undermining the general view in the general public that if you get your bike stolen or your car stolen or you're burgled, you don't get any police response whatsoever. But if they think you've thought the wrong thoughts with a tweet or somebody's reporting you, telling on you, then it is just like the Stasi, Starmer's Stasi.
Nigel Nelson, is that fair to say that, or is that over the top?
No, it's not fair. I mean, I've got some sympathy with what Michael is saying about non-crime hate incidents, and I think there's a lot of problem about hate crime going on at the moment. If you look at the CPS guidance on what a hate crime is, they can't even define it because it's meant to be hostility towards a particular group, religious, racial, sexual, or trans groups. But there's no legal definition of hostility. So as a result of that, even unfriendliness would count as being a hate crime. So I have some sympathy there. No, I don't think there's two-tier policing. There's multi-tier policing. It depends on the event that they have before them, how they treat it, and that's the right way to go on. They make mistakes. That they didn't do enough for the sex abuse of children that we saw a few years ago because they were worried about the racial aspect to it.
Well, that's two-tiered.
Well, that's a mistake.
They were terrified of being called racist, so they stood off.
Yes, that's a mistake. That's not two-tier. That is where the multi-tier wasn't working. So what you're doing is, if you see a Palestinian protest, if that protest is peaceful, you would expect the police not to intervene and rudge things up.
But if you ramp up the pressure on people, then it imparts a feeling of hostility that can get that violence coming back. We have to leave there, Nigel and Michael. We have to move on. I'm being told it's time to trot on. Now, coming up next, talking of which, farmers are threatening strike action over inheritance tax changes that they say will destroy family farming and damage UK food security. Is this the government reaping what they sow, and do they need to reconsider changing tack? This is Farage with Martin Daubney on GB News.
Good evening. I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It is pretty cold for the time of year for some of us, and with that, there is the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through this evening and overnight. That's because we have a weather system coming in from the west, and it's going to bump against the cold air that's across many northern parts of the UK currently, leading to the risk of some significant snow, particularly across northern parts of England. Could be up to 20 centimetres perhaps over some higher ground, and even some accumulations to lower levels too. Also a snow and ice risk across parts of Northern Ireland and the far north of Scotland. Across parts of Scotland where we get some clear skies, temperatures plummeting. A harsh frost here with some places falling to around -8, possibly even colder than this. But it's going to be a milder start further south where we have a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain. So a bit damp first thing across southern parts, but also relatively mild. Most of the snow and the wet weather across northern England will have cleared away as we go through early in the morning, and also across Northern Ireland it should have turned dry by then. Meanwhile, across Scotland, a bright but frosty start for many places. Do watch out for some icy patches and a little bit of lying snow as well because of those wintry showers coming in from the north. As we go through the day, and yes, most of the wet and wintry weather will have cleared away towards the east. Watch out though, there will be some outbreaks of rain feeding into parts of the southwest in particular, and across the north of Scotland we're going to continue to see those wintry showers. So again, some sleet or snow with accumulations continuing to build up. It is going to be a chilly day, temperatures on the low side for the time of year and feeling even colder in those brisk winds. Little change as we go into Wednesday, sticking with a cold northerly flow, and it's on that northerly flow that we're going to see some further wintry showers in anywhere exposed to that wind direction. And again, despite the fact that there will be plenty of sunshine around, it is still going to feel bitterly cold. We are going to see some further wintry showers through the rest of the week, perhaps some more persistent snow for some of us. Bye-bye.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, covering for the big man. Now, another issue for Sir Keir Starmer is facing food shortages as farmers threaten to strike over Rachel Reeves's inheritance tax raid. Transport Secretary Louise Haigh said the government would ensure food security if it faces militant action over these plans. Well, 2 protests are due for this week, with Jeremy Clarkson expected to join one of them. And I'm joined now by the farmer and the Wales chairman of the Conservative Rural Forum, Aled Thomas, as well, of course, as my panel. Aled, welcome to the show. Let's start with the protests this week. I've had so many farmers on this channel. They vary from those who at the moment are playing Queensberry rules. They want to have a cup of tea and a hobnob and a chat. But I'm talking to other farmers out there who are saying they're getting itchy feet, they're getting more militant, they're talking about strike action, downing tools, choking supply chains, and maybe even having a general strike and food shortages. Where do you stand on that spectrum, and how serious do you think this could get?
Look, where I'm looking at it is farmers have seen this all before in Wales, for starters. And I think it's those farmers that are perhaps the most frustrated because they've seen this 6-7 months ago with damaging policies that Labour brought in at the Senedd. Around 5,500 jobs wouldn't be cut. I think the trouble is, by talking too strong too quickly, Labour don't understand this policy themselves. They don't understand what they're doing to the countryside. So the first step is we need to sit them down and talk to them, tell them how this policy is going to affect it. The government's own rules and its own kind of figures don't match up, with the Treasury saying only around 25 to 30% are going to be affected, but DEFRA saying 66% are going to be affected. So they're not quite clear on their own figures first. So we need to get to that point before any sort of escalations. Because, of course, when it does get to striking and withholding perhaps meat or produce, many farmers working on tight margins probably couldn't afford to do that anyway. So it's a very difficult point to do that, and it's very strong if they do get to that stage. Now,
Aled Thomas, nobody wants to see trouble in the streets. Nobody wants to see blockades around Westminster. The NFU, a lot of farmers I've spoken to are saying if we lose the public, like Just Stop Oil, we'll be in a bad place. But tomorrow is seen as round one. Tomorrow is seen as laying down the case. Do you think there's a resolution, a chance of resolution here, or will the government stick to its guns? They've said all along, yeah, we hear what you're saying, but we've made our mind up. The policy is fair.
I think there is an absolute chance for a resolution, and tomorrow is the day to make that clear. Do I, in my heart of hearts, think that there's going to be any sort of U-turn? Absolutely not. I think this is a purposefully driven policy to drive division between the rural voter and the urban voter. Labour are out there to shore up that urban vote.
To what end?
Well, this policy actually isn't going to bring much money into the Treasury realistically.
$500 million per year, right?
In the grand scheme of things, considering the sort of the tax rises that we saw from Rachel Reeves, that $500 million, while a lot of money, of course, in general, it's not really that much. It's hardly going to touch the sides and things like the NHS budget and that. Sort of thing. So what we're seeing is that seed of division being sown, shoring up that urban vote and making sure that that class war continues between Labour voters and normal voters. I think it kind of reminisces me. I think Margaret Thatcher said many years ago that the left would be happy to see the poorer get poorer as long as the rich don't get any richer. And it just echoing that sort of class war coming back once again.
And Thomas, there we go. Strong words. This is a class war. Pitching rural voters against urban voters. Labour Party, Aled Thomas there, making a clear pitch, don't care about the farmer community. Nigel Nelson.
No, I don't, with greatest respect to Aled, no, I don't think that's true. It's about raising money. It's the same reason that you raise national insurance. It's about raising money. That Rachel Reeves needed £40 billion, and everybody who's been hit by a tax is now squealing, whether it's farmers, whether it's GPs, whether it's pharmacies. All of them have been hit. In this situation here, you're talking about if the Treasury figures are right, and Aled made a point about we're not quite sure how the figures work, but roughly 1,700 farms are passed on every year. Of those, only about 500 would fall into this kind of bracket that actually would be worth over $1 million. If that's the case, 200 of those are rich landowners who've used the land as a tax haven because they wanted to avoid inheritance tax. Those are the people we're hitting.
Michael Brown, last word to you on this one.
Well, I totally dispute Nigel's figures, but I don't think the game is over by any means with regard to normal procedures. The fact is the Labour Party have got something like 50 MPs who sit on tiny little majorities representing for the first time farming constituencies. Now, Starmer may, and the cat's out of the bag, that fellow John McTernan, who was a big Blairite behind-the-scenes man in Downing Street during the Blair years, he actually said last week, didn't he, just as Margaret Thatcher wanted to get rid of the miners, so if necessary, we'll get rid of the farmers.
Disowned by Keir Starmer.
Disowned, OK, but we know what Labour MPs think. We know that there are many, but there are 50 Labour MPs who, for the first time ever in Labour and the Conservative Party's history, are representing rural seats. I would suggest that farmers beat the same sort of protests that they're going to do tomorrow to each one of those MP surgeries, week after week after week.
OK, well, tomorrow is when it all starts. Aled Thomas, thank you very much for joining us. And, of course, Michael and Nigel, see more of you after the break. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, coming up next, Keir Starmer has met President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, becoming the first UK leader to meet with the Chinese president since 2018. Now, is this a sign of desperate cozying up to Beijing, or is it a pragmatic attempt to thaw relations with a global superpower at a time of geopolitical and economic uncertainty? And does it risk drawing ire from the incoming Trump presidency? That's all coming up in just a moment.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, let's speak now to Charlie Mullins, who's the founder of Pimlico Plumbers, and entrepreneur Oliver Hodgson. Really good to see you both this morning. Charlie, let's start with you. Has working from home and the culture surrounding working from home killed work experience, do you think?
Undoubtedly. Many companies now are not getting youngsters in for the work experience because of the fact they don't have the staff in. So if they're only in 2 days a week, they're not going to get in the youngsters. They've got no one to train them. So it's killed it totally. And if you think it's bad now, probably 4 or 5 years from now, it'll be absolutely ridiculous. This working from home, I said from day one, It's going to kill youngsters' futures, youngsters' careers, and getting people into the workplace. So now the damage is showing through, unfortunately. COVID finished a couple of years ago. The working from home should have stopped and get people back into the workplace.
I mean, Oliver, you have to say it's difficult to see how people in a work-from-home environment can do any sort of on-the-job training at all.
It's really interesting, the work experience piece, actually, because we run an internship program in the summer here. We had 5 people in the office in person and they really thrived, but we did have a couple of people who joined remotely because of their own reasons, right, and where they were. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that as well, because I've got clients who have completely remote teams. Now, I don't. I have an office and our team are based in here, but our clients who do, they're able to offer work experience opportunities digitally with fantastic technology to people across the world, right? So they have people in their team who are working from all sorts of different continents, which is obviously fantastic. But I agree with Charlie, right? You cannot knock in-person engagement. You cannot knock being in the office.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has met with President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit today in Rio de Janeiro, telling the Chinese leader that he wants to build consistent, durable, respectful relations. And later telling the media that he wanted a serious and pragmatic relationship with China. Sounds like he's on Tinder. It was the first meeting between a British Prime Minister and Xi Jinping since 2018, when that was Theresa May. And Starmer proposed further top-level meetings. Well, relations with the global superpower have deteriorated sharply as a result of China's crackdown on pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong, concern over Chinese espionage and human rights abuses against the Muslims in the northwestern region of Xinjiang. Now, we're joined by the assistant editor of The Spectator and the host of the Chinese Whispers podcast, Cindy Yu. Cindy, welcome to the show. So, Xi Jinping backs Labour's plans for growth. Is there any wonder? With these net zero plans, surely that means offshoring and outsourcing everything we make. The Chinese must be licking their lips at dealing with Labour's government.
Yeah, certainly on renewables, the Chinese have definitely played a blinder, since making it a key area for its industrial policy in the 2000s, really. Now it's become the industry that most developed countries want to get into, are creating demand for, and China has become the biggest supplier. So that's one bet that the Chinese have made that have really paid off. And in terms of the growth plan, yes, China is going to be trying to help British growth, or at least Labour hope so. But actually, there's a reverse side here as well, because as you know, Martin, the Chinese economy hasn't been doing well either. So China needs its partners, trading partners, that is, more than ever before as well. And we've seen in its diplomacy in the last few years a softening, so not so much wolf warrior, more kind of tame, as it were, just because China wants to have more friends than enemies at the moment.
And David Lammy, that man again, has previously urged genocide claims against Xi Jinping's regime. Is there any foreign leader he hasn't offended at some point in the past? That's a separate issue. But is it a necessary sin, if you like, to cosy up to the Red Dragon? Like it or not, they have a lot of stuff that we want, and everyone seems to bear their fangs about human rights issues, and they soon forget about it when we need their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that genocide claim from David Lammy is going to come back to haunt him again and again. because it did feel like when he said it at the time, it was quite a big thing, and that we in the China policy world were saying, oh, that's a break from previous policy. And just to remind audience and members, that's basically saying that what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims is a genocide. That's a legal term that many critics of China does levy against the country, but for any prospective government, that was a big claim. In any case, he did say that. The government's not saying that anymore. So it does feel like, that once you get into government, the realities of governing do come to kind of start to restrain you. And fundamentally, the thing about China is that you can wish it could go away, or that wish it wasn't the second biggest economy in the world. You can wish that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't rule China. But what next? You can't wish it away. And so the question is, how do you deal with this reality, with the world that we actually do live in?
Well, it seems like the Starmer regime's idea is to get closer, in stark contrast to Donald Trump's regime, which is talking about massive tariffs. Cindy Yu, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always an absolute pleasure. Coming up next, of course, is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. And let's talk to my panel as well. So, Jacob, when I bring you first in on this, so isn't it funny how David Lammy, let's talk about him again, every foreign leader he's ever talked about, he seems to have put his foot in it. Will the Chinese look at Sir Keir Starmer? I couldn't help but noticing today when Xi Jinping shook Starmer's hand, he looked like a fox looking at a chicken.
Yeah, yes, I think you're absolutely right. Xi Jinping looked as if he was in charge. The body language was very domineering. We do have interest with China. We want to buy their goods, but we should stand up to them. China respects strength, and we should campaign for people like Jimmy Lai to be released, a British citizen in Hong Kong, in breach of the joint declaration. We should be standing up for Britons abroad, and the government and the previous government have been very weak about that, and China doesn't respect weakness.
Nigel Nelson, does Sir Keir Starmer have that grit, that steel to make China take him seriously? And is it something that we should be doing? The Chinese have got patchy records left, right and centre, but we do need to trade with them.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we do need to trade with them. The most important thing is that we actually begin to understand them and they us. So the more that we actually talk with each other, the better. I mean, Keir Starmer did bring up the case of Jimmy Lai today. He brought up human rights abuses too. Bear in mind that China is a country that not only doesn't like democracy, it actually thinks it fails. Our political systems are poles apart. We believe in prioritising the individual. What the Chinese believe is in prioritising the masses. And as a result of that, for the ordinary Chinese person, their GDP per capita has gone up from $300 to $12,000 in 35 years. So those people are quite happy. So there's a huge gulf that we have to bridge. So if we can understand each other, that'd be great.
Michael, is it a case of talk tough in opposition and then reality bites in government? You have to deal with them whether you like it or not.
I have no problem with the Prime Minister engaging with the Chinese leader, but I go back 40 years. In 1984, I was a rebel over the signing of the agreement to set up the one state, two solutions for Hong Kong. Look where that got us. And I remember I was actually in Taiwan just before the negotiations concluded, and I was asked by the South China Morning News what I thought about it. I got hauled over the coals by the Foreign Secretary, Geoffrey Howe, and I was right. And they were wrong.
There we go.
Down the track.
So we've got a quick 40 seconds. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, State of the Nation is up next. What's on your menu, sir?
Lots tonight. I'm going to be talking about all these illegal immigrants who we don't deport when they've committed serious crimes, and the indoctrination of our children. Helping my daughter, not very effectively, with her French oral, I discovered that she's being taught too many workers are exploited, exposed to risks, to translate into French for the French oral. What is going on? They're being taught about the environment, employment rights, and how to protest. No wonder a former girl from the school that my daughter's at ends up with her hair pink in prison.
Magnificent stuff. Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, always a pleasure. Michael Brown, Nigel Nelson, thank you for joining me in the studio. Of course, State of the Nation with Jacob is up next. I'll be back tomorrow 3 till 6. Thanks for your company this evening. First, though, is your weather with Alex Burke.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It is pretty cold for the time of year for some of us, and with that, there is the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through this evening and overnight. That's because we have a weather system coming in from the west, and it's going to bump against the cold air that's across many northern parts of the UK currently, leading to the risk of some significant snow, particularly across northern parts of England. Could be up to 20 centimetres perhaps over some higher ground, and even some accumulations to lower levels too. Also a snow and ice risk across parts of Northern Ireland and the far north of Scotland. Across parts of Scotland where we get some clear skies, temperatures plummeting. A harsh frost here with some places falling to around